good evening, everybody. I'm using the screen recorder because at least there's a little bit of light from the screen, and it also uses less memory. I'm sorry, this car is really loud, so I'm gonna just talk louder to make it. I didn't want to waste time. I'm driving in my car. So there was some comments about this question about whether or not God knows the future, and I certainly believe with perfect faith that God knows the future. The question is not really whether or not God knows the future, but whether or not it's a dogmatic requirement in Judaism to believe that. And this friend of ours here who commented, and he posted the video where my friend, the rabbi, who's well-known and controversial, talks about this. He quoted the Rambam and the Ralbag and other Rishonim who he says he adopts their view because it makes sense. And as we say in Yiddish, I cannot forgive him that right to follow those Rishonim. It's 100% kosher and not one of the issues of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. We have Rabbi Ezra here commented, of course, God knows the future because all the prophets contain prophetic, things for the future. And, excuse me, but also God gives us free will. Well, again, it's not one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim that God gives us free will. It makes a lot of sense, but is it heretical to say that there is no free will? The Ishbitzer Rebbe obviously did not believe in free will. If you study all the Torah's Ishbitz, he pretty much has almost a Calvinist idea within Judaism. The only difference is that Calvin, lahavdil, thought, everyone is destined to go to hell or destined to go to heaven, whereas pretty much the Ishbitzer pretty much believed at least all Jews are going to heaven. For lack of a better term, obviously the terminology is somewhat different. But, meaning that, which again, it could be more along the lines of the Calvinist view of who are the elect, meaning if to Ishbitz, the elect are Israel, are the Klal Yisrael, or the Jewish people, whereas, Calvin would say the elect are the Christians, and not all the Christians, right? But the elect, and that's the Calvin, whoever the elect are, right? And so that's what we have, the difference between these two, and also the difference between the two is that, Calvin, pretty much says, if someone, is not from the elect, they're damned to hell, whereas the Ishbitzer view is that, well, no, everything ultimately is for God's good, and our choice is really how to deal with it. Do we recognize that this was God's will when we did something wrong? Or does it ruin our life? Does it, but still, where, at what point is there free will and not free will? And I'm not saying that the Ishbitzer is right, and I'm not saying that the Ralbag was right. What I'm saying is that both of these are kosher. I know often in the Ashkenazi view, we want to try to say how, when it says Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, both this and this are the word of the living God, we want to try to show how really there's no contradiction here, even though obviously in the simple sense, these two views seem to contradict, but there are ways to, make a pilpul to say that they don't really contradict, if that's what you want to say. But the basic ideology is that, there are different ideas. That's the main point that I want to bring out here, is that there are different ideas. And as long as you can point to a kosher Jewish idea, whether it's a Rishon, it's an Achron, within the realm of Orthodox Judaism, then you are still within the realm of Orthodox Judaism. It's only when you start to, and I'm not mentioning Calvin, chas v'sholom, to say that I support that idea, but the point is that within Judaism you have a similar theology from a certain school. Obviously, if I would say that to my Rebbe from high school, Moshe Weinberg, he'd smack me in the face. How dare you compare the Ishbitzer, the Holy of the Holies, the Ishbitzer, to Calvin? But what I'm saying is that obviously there's an obvious comparison between the two, and there are obvious differences. The obvious difference is that Calvin was a Christian and the Ishbitzer was a Jew. But more than that, there are differences even in the way of their approach between the two. Whereas, you have from the Calvinist school something Rabbi Weinberg would often talk about, of how the Christians saw us as sinners in the hands of an angry God, and like a spider in a web and about to fall into the fire of hell. Whereas Judaism, is talking more a positive religion about how much God loves us, and how But the thing is, the truth is, of course, you can find both ideas both in Judaism and in Christianity. We have to be intellectually honest about that there are the positive, uplifting type of ideas, and the scary, within the Musar world, the godless Adam and the shiftless Adam, and all of these things, between the Vardik what was the other one? The more positive one, where Victor Miller Slobodka, So we have these different ideas, and we have, excuse me, different Masoras. Sorry, within Judaism. And so from a Jewish perspective, every other religion is heretical and most likely even idolatrous. So we're only mentioning the other religions al derech mashal, as Howard said, as a parable, as something that a lot of people outside of our community would be more familiar with. Because, to us, the Ishbitzer is a real man da'amar. He's, really someone worth, and also within the academic world, the Jewish academic world, the Ishbitzer is a figure that's very interesting to the Jewish academics, to someone like the dean of my college, Rabbi Dr. Sokol, very interested in the Ishbitzer, right? And a lot of the academics who are Orthodox Jews and often Talmidei Chachamim, but want to, operate within the university world, right? They talk a lot about Ishbitz. They're very interested in the Ishbitzer, right? But still, nonetheless, the average Jewish academic will know at least who Calvin is, right? But the average Calvinist doesn't know who the Ishbitzer is, right? So, but in any event, we have our 13 dogmas. That, and even that, is up for debate as to whether or not those 13 are required dogmatically or not. Generally, it's understood that they are not, and that's just a consensus in our community that they are more or less required. What is required is orthopraxy, right? And our orthopraxy includes liturgy, right? Which includes doctrine, which includes orthodoxy. Now, it's not required to recite the 13 Animamins. It's not required to say Yigdal. The Arizal did not say Yigdal, and most Hasidim do not say Yigdal, although most Sephardim do. Although a lot of, the Shloach Kodesh held from Yigdal, right? But what I'm saying is, either way, there's no liturgical requirement to recite Yigdal, but there is a liturgical requirement to recite the Kriya Shema and to recite and to recite the Shemona Esrei, right? And the Shemona Esrei contains doctrine. You know, our basic liturgy contains doctrine. And so, since doctrine has been legislated liturgically, you know, practically into our orthopraxy, so that is where we derive an orthodoxy, meaning that is why Reform is heretical, because they have made liturgical changes that are doctrinal in nature, as opposed to the conservative movement that made liturgical changes that are more political in nature, you know, with egalitarian, you know, additions and not subtractions to the Shemona Esrei. You know, you could argue that it's, you know, the reasoning behind it is flawed, it's problematic, but it's not heretical, as opposed to the Reform. It's an actual heresy that they, you know, meaning that they deny the resurrection, and so therefore they had to change the liturgy. Meaning, so because someone's asking about this friend of mine and his ideas about the resurrection, he points out that the Rambam, you know, had to write a whole polemic, essentially apologetic work that was an actual apology. You know, meaning to say, you know, to kind of cover himself, to show that he's not a heretic and he does accept the resurrection, right? But does he even hold that it's necessary? You know, it seems that he does, but he doesn't mention it in his code in the Mishnah Torah. He mentions it in the Parish Mishnayos, but the truth is, even so, in the code, he does mention that, you know, someone who is converting, for example, needs to accept the articles of our faith, right? And that's, whereas the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention that. So therefore, it does show that the Rambam has an ideology, legally speaking, meaning where does it come in legally? Just like, you know, the same thing. The Rambam has the text of the Siddur, and he includes, you know, Baruch Ato Hashem Mechayei HaMeisim. And so therefore, you know, Dvarim Shebalev Einam Dvarim, words of the heart are not words. We're not mind readers. We're concerned with the statements of our faith, which are listed in our liturgy. And even if someone questions that, but nonetheless recites the liturgy, so they remain orthodox, essentially, at least as far as that doctrine is concerned. Meaning, if someone questions someone's attachment to a particular doctrine, if they recite the liturgy that includes that doctrine, that shows that they believe in it. Meaning, the humanistic heresy removes all references to God, right, from their so-called Siddur. And I'll pronounce it Siddur instead of Siddur, because it's not a Hamish Azach, you know. And I won't even put the word Judaism next to that, because it's so far away, right? Even Reform, notice I didn't say Judaism. You know, conservative is Judaism. You know, we might not agree with them, might strongly disagree with them, we might rebuke them, but it is nonetheless a halachic movement that is within the realms of belief officially, even if a lot of the adherents, even many of their rabbis themselves, might be heretics. But officially the movement is a halachic movement, right? And so therefore, they may be chutz l'machane, they may be outside of our camp, but they are nonetheless a type of a Judaism, as opposed to the Reform, which is heretical. That doesn't mean we have to hate them. You know, we could still be friends with them, And not just because they're trying to be makar of them, right? But because just to be menschlich, And I know people say, well, you don't have to be menschlich to the heretics. And it's true, Marin Vein Malin. But nonetheless, all right, a nebuch and apikoros is auch an apikoros, right? Abbas is a nebuch, right? What are we emphasizing there when the Brisker Rav says nebuch and apikoros is auch an apikoros? Are we emphasizing the apikoros or are we emphasizing the nebuch, right? Which do we emphasize there? There's a time to emphasize the apikoros, and there's a time to emphasize the nebuch. And you have to have a certain chokhmah and a Yiddish gefühl and a Yiddish hearts to know what's when, right? But sof kol sof, that's what we are dealing with. That's what. But with this question. Yeah, I believe not exactly the Ishbitzer view, but something quite close to it, right? My Rebbe, Kalaver Rebbe, Sol Gesund sein, you should have a big refuah shlema, the Tzaddik Hador, in my opinion. Not that my opinion matters that much, but I've heard other people say it too. Heilige Kalaver Rebbe, he always likes to quote from Raburi of Strelisk, where he said that, if you believe in Hishkacha Pratis, you believe in divine providence. It means you believe it to the point that if you see a wagon laden with straw, that it was preordained for the 6 days of creation, which piece of straw should be on top of which piece, which should be to the left or the right, which one should fall off the wagon, where, at what time, that all of that is preordained for the 6 days of creation. But none of that has to do with Bechira Chofshis. None of that has to do with free will. And so therefore, that aspect of predetermination, which means foreknowledge, I believe in it. Now, and Raburi Strelisker said that someone who doesn't believe it is an apikoros. And he brings a good argument to it, right? So, and if you really think about it deeply, that part is already predetermined. Also, consequences, they may be changed, whatever, but ultimately, the ideology of free will doesn't mean necessarily that someone has free will to hurt someone that God did not give permission to hurt. But on the other hand, we see ideas in Chazal that would contradict that as well. So in the end, there are many different views, and as long as you're drawing from a kosher well, it doesn't matter which view you're adopting. What matters is that you're adopting a kosher view. And that's really the end of the story. We don't really have to go further than that. We can discuss these things as having a nice conversation, and we can look into what the Rishonim, the Achronim, and Chazal themselves say, and what the Tanakh says, what the Torah itself says. But in the end, as long as you are following something that has a basis in something kosher, and generally speaking, the way we accept things is that as long as you're not violating the 13 principles of faith, and what I'm saying is even if you question one of the 13 principles of faith, but you do not change the liturgy to deny one of them, then you're an Orthodox Jew. You might not be orthoprax, but you're Orthodox, right? Orthopraxy means you follow halacha. And again, there are chumras and kulas and different opinions in halacha. When it comes to halacha, we're much more strict than we are about hashkafa. Because there is a generally accepted idea of a psak halacha but not a generally accepted idea of a psak hashkofa. Meaning, in hashkofa, in ideology and theology, you have a lot more room as long as it's within the realm of you're quoting a kosher source. When it comes to halacha, you cannot just quote something from Chazal. I would say, if you follow the Rambam, you're okay, but it's better to be strict the way that is generally accepted in the communities, and in general, to follow the things that, whatever your community standards are, that is a halachic consideration. And so too, therefore, if you, give even lip service to heresy, you are violating the norms of your community as well. So it's better not to really say that you don't believe something like this, But nonetheless, it is much more complicated than the black and white that a lot of people tend to put into their world of how, it has to be this way, and if you go a different way, you're a heretic. It's not, there's a specific meaning of what a heretic means, but I've said before, and I'll say it again, there's a difference between a halachic definition of a heretic and a colloquial definition of a heretic. A lot of people are colloquially heretics, but not halachically heretics of Marid and Van Malen. Reform are halachically heretical, but they could be, say, nebuch and apikoros, and we can emphasize the nebuch. So, I want to go get gas. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. I've already talked for 22 minutes already anyway. And I hope everything's good. And God bless you. Be well.